process who changed the truth of Elohim into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the creator who is blessed forever.
Okay.
Right? So what do you mean? Who changed the truth of the Most High into a lie? Everything you thought was in the Bible, some years of serious consideration has now shown you that it's not even in the Bible.
This is about the way that I walk. You got an issue about the way that I talk. I'ma give it to you. For the brothers outlined in the chalk, Tamir Rice chilling out in the park. I'ma give it to you. And they don't know the way that I feel. On the mission now to tell you what's real. I'ma give it to you. While you're looking for a proper appeal, you want the gospel just to cop you a feel. I'm not dealing with you. I'm hitting on this track like it's magical. Place it with the classical, I make it international. You want the sympathetic, and I'm a little drastic though. Focus on my past, I'ma give you what you asking for. Save it for the fashion show. Talking about your church service, I ain't here to talk to you. Where the hell your pastor go? Lying through his teeth, preaching like he swear to God, misleading people. Now they act like they ain't scared of God. People looking for change, but choose to walk ahead of y'all. Make a tight beat, tell the truth in the song, and they head a nod. No change, no option of dodging flames. Dreams of copping the range, sneakers, outfits, and chains. Nigga prophets explain why demon prophets remain. One ticket to hell, my niggas hopping the train. Y'all got a name to put the top prophets to shame. His name and his fame is stopping the pain. This is about the way that I walk. You got an issue about the way that I talk. I'ma give it to you. For the brothers outlined in the chalk, Tamir Rice chilling out in the park. I'ma give it to you. And they don't know the way that I feel. On the mission now to tell you what's real. I'ma give it to you. While you're looking for a proper appeal, you want the gospel just to cop you a feel. I'm not dealing with you. Didn't want to read it, receiving it from the Catholics. Mine couldn't conceive of believing it from the Baptists. The Hebrews wasn't white, so they running all out of actors. Searching through the chapters and seeing they got it backwards. Kindly tell the truth, and the rage and them only escalated. Every word they hated, but none want to debate it. So what I'm supposed to do, let them fake it until they make it. Nah, bowing to the idols, my powers vowing to take them down. Non-believers smoking while Christians drinking the potion. Everybody's high on that lie when the demon's spoken. Alive on arrival with Bruce, we all awoke with. Vision kinda blurry, he's realigning the focus. Gotta tell the truth, if it fills the room or it clears it out. Fears don't wanna hear, so I'm filled with a lot of fears and doubts. You gave me the heart, so it's time to put the action in. Praises that I give you on earth will only be practicing. This is about the way that I walk. You got an issue about the way that I talk. I'ma give it to you. For the brothers outlined in the chalk, Tamir Rice chilling out in the park. I'ma give it to you. And they don't know the way that I feel. On the mission now to tell you what's real. I'ma give it to you. While you're looking for a proper appeal, you want the gospel just to cop you a feel. I'm not dealing with you.
All right. Mic check. 1 2 1 2. Hopefully, my audio is good. Check 1 2. Hold on, I need to fix sound. Make sure I'm not echoing. If my mic is okay, and my audio and video is okay, someone please put a 1 in the comments. We greatly appreciate it as we get started. And if you can hear me, we let's come in and put likes up. Let's get the likes up in the video to get started, if you don't mind. Everything is everything. I probably need to and then let me know too if my mic volume needs to come up, if my mic needs to come up a little bit, or if it needs to go down. Really can't tell at the moment. All right, Shabbat Shalom. Brother Emmanuel says we're good over in Facebook land. All right, good way to get it started. All right, so if, by the sound of my voice, if you can hear me, go ahead and prepare Jeremiah chapter 10, and we'll read that for a devotion. Okay, let's get Jeremiah chapter 10. We'll read that for a devotion. We're coming back, you know what I'm saying, with a part 2 to the worshiping God wrong, or the wrong God, so on and so forth. We do have to complete that mission, right? Hopefully we won't keep you here all day, but as I said a couple Sabbaths ago when we did part 1, there's a lot of information, so I don't know if we're going to get through it all today, but we're going to try. So obviously, I guess my mic is cool. All right, we'll roll with it then. We will roll with it. So let me go ahead and switch my screen over. Get us to the word. All right. So let's go ahead and get Jeremiah chapter 10. Okay. We're going to read it in its entirety. All right. Make sure everything is everything. All right. It says, "Hear the word which Yahawah speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus said Yahawah, do not learn the way of the nations, and do not be awed by the signs of the heavens, for the nations are awed by them. For the laws of these people are worthless. For one cuts a tree from a forest, works of hands of a craftsman with a cutting tool. They beautify it with silver and gold. They strengthen it with nails and hammers, so that it does not topple. They are like rounded posts. They do not speak. They have to be carried, because they do not walk. Do not be afraid of them, for they do no evil, nor is it in them to do any good. There is none like you, O Yahawah. You are great, and great is your name in might. Who would not fear you, O sovereign of the nations? For this is your due, for among all the wise men of the nations and in their reigns, there is none like you. They are both brutish and foolish. An instruction of worthlessness is the tree. Silver is beaten into plates, and the bro from Tarshish, and the gold from Uphaz, and the work of the craftsman, and the hands of the smith, draped in blue and purple. All of them are the work of skilled ones. But Yahawah is truly Elohim. He is the living Elohim and the everlasting sovereign. At his wrath, the earth shakes. The nations are unable to stand his displeasure. Say to them this, the Elah, that did not make the heavens and the earth, shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. He has made the earth by his power. He has established the word by his wisdom. He has stretched out the heavens by his understanding. When he makes his voice heard, there is a roaring of waters in the heavens, and he makes vapors rise from the ends of the earth. The lightnings for rain he has made, and brings wind from his treasures. Everyone is brutish in knowledge. Every smith is put to shame by his idols, for his molded image is falsehood, and there is no spirit in them. They are worthless, a work of mockery, and in the time of their punishment they perish. The portion of Jacob is not like these, for he is the maker of all, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. Yahawah of hosts is his name. Gather up the bundle from the ground, you who live under siege. For thus said Yahawah, see, at this time I am hurling out the inhabitants of the land, and shall distress them, so that they feel it. Woe to me for my breaking. My wound is grievous, but I say, this is my sickness, and I bear it. My tents have been ravaged, and all my cords have been broken. My children have gone from me, and they are no more. There is none to pitch my tent any more, or to set up my curtains. For the shepherds have become brutish. They have not sought Yahawah. Therefore they did not understand, and all their flocks scattered. See, it has come, the voice of report, and the great shaking out of the land of the north, to make the cities of Yehudah a waste, a habitation of jackals. O Yahawah, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not for man who walks to direct his own steps. O Yahawah, chastise me, but with right ruling, not in your displeasure, lest you bring me to naught. Pour out your wrath on the nations who do not know you, and on the tribes who do not call on your name. For they have eaten up Jacob, devoured him, and consumed him, and laid waste his home. Right. So the Most High's word is most certainly blessed. Let's get us back to the PowerPoint real quick, and we'll kick it off. Right. So when we left off, I don't know if you remember, we were getting into the history of Babylon, right? And then the point is just to bring full circle the knowledge of mystery Babylon, and understanding that, you know what I'm saying, replacement religion or syncretism, calling something God that has nothing to do with God. All right. We have to establish the origin of that thing. That way, when it is presented to us in contemporary times and nowadays, we can recognize it for what it is, right? And we have to obey the scriptures that tells us, all right, to have no fellowship with the evil workings of darkness, but to rather expose it, right? Hold on, I need to fix something real quick and we can get started. Real quick. How many of you have seen the video where the white pastor goes in and says that black pastors are theologically flawed or something to that degree? Yeah, I wanted to deal with that a little bit. And then to bring forth the conversation, because that's why this message is so important. Folks don't really understand the origin of the ideology of Christianity, right? So we have to bring the receipts and give the history on who started it, when it was started, the motivation behind it, so on and so forth. So we have to I want to bring that conversation to light a little bit, because he says something to the lines where he says like 90 to 95% of black pastors are theologically flawed, right? And I know a lot of folks who have a problem with what he said. They do it on the basis of race. You know, they like especially black pastors or black Christians in particular. They don't like that divisive talk, right? They don't like the fact that you're calling something or you're addressing a certain race when it comes to the scriptures. Okay. But what people fail to realize, right, is a couple of things. Okay. The religion that took over the world was taught by Gentiles, by majority Gentiles. Okay. So when you have the ideology of Christianity, all right, through the subjugation of the Roman Catholic Church, you have a Gentile version of the doctrine. Okay. It's important to recognize what's true, right? What's real, what's permissible, what's biblical. Okay. That's why we always come with a plethora of scriptures when we're giving out the message, right? I'll wait until I play the video to actually go in on that, right? But it lends itself to the fact that that's why I don't get into that conversation of Gentile salvation, right? I don't believe it's time to talk about Gentile salvation when the Most High's chosen people, the elect, don't even know that they are the chosen people or the elect, right? They don't know the biblical definition of sin, right? And the thing that they are calling God, right, was practiced thousands of years before the religion of Christianity. So it is not the same God. We have to deal with it. We're going to deal with it. Shabbat Shalom, Kwam 12. Good to see you. Shabbat Shalom, Aqua. All right. So we're going to get into it. Let me get myself back together. All right. And let's just take it from the top. Let's take it from the top. Right. So what you have on the screen now is Israel is it's an artistic portrayal of the Tower of Babel. All right. And the Tower of Babel is the genesis of false religion. Okay. Babel / Babylon. What it did was it united mankind in difference against the Most High. Right. It inaugurated a legacy of idolatry and confusion that will permeate future empires. Okay. That's why when we get into Revelations chapter 17 and it talks about Babylon has fallen. All right. Babylon has fallen, so on and so forth. It is talking about the Babylonian symbolic representation of humanity's desire. All right. To organize rebellion against the Most High. Right. That's what that religion is. So it's important when you see the sun worshiping of Christianity, the influence of all of these pagan rituals, so on and so forth, right? That it is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that you are worshiping. Okay. Matter of fact, at Babel, right? At Babel, humans sought to make a name for themselves, according to Genesis chapter 11, verse 4. Matter of fact, so I don't get us. I want to bring it. Let's go there real quick. Let's read that. Let's go to Genesis, and we'll start at chapter 11. We'll start at the first verse, right? Now it says, and all the earth had one language and one speech. Right. And it came to be as they set out from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. It says in verse 4, and they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, right? And make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over all the face of the earth. Why is that important? If you look at the religion, the core of religion, okay, especially when we're dealing with Christianity, because we have to address the elephant in the room. When you're dealing with the core of Christianity, it's a selfish religion. Okay, we'll get into the history of when Emperor Constantine and the Roman Catholic Church divorced itself from the practice of the Yehudim. All right, they said, let us have no dealings with the detestable workings of the Jews, and then they sought to separate themselves from what the Scripture said, what the Most High said. Right. And we'll get into that when they established their calendar for Easter and things of that nature. Verse 5, it says, then Yahawah came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. It says, and Yahawah said, look, they are one people and they all have one language. And this is what they began to do. It says, and now they are not going to be withheld from doing whatever they plan to do. Come, let us go there, confuse their language so that they do not understand one another's speech. It says, and Yahawah scattered them from there over the face of all the earth and left them off from building the city. It says, that is why the name is called Babel, because there Yahawah confused the language of all the earth, and from there Yahawah scattered them over the face of the earth. Right. So, and then it goes into the genealogy of Shem, so on and so forth. Right. So it's important that we get established with the genesis, all right, of the rebellion against the Most High, to understand this whole concept, worshiping God wrong or the wrong God. Right. So King Nimrod, in opposition to the Most High, King Nimrod, Nimrod, or Salakia, I'm saying King Nimrod. Nimrod, he was a king associated with Babylon, all right? He became venerated as a god, all right? And he planted the seeds of Mystery Babylon, the religion, you know what I'm saying, that has so much to do with syncretism and that conversation that we have to address over and over, right? So idolatry, what it did was it spread. Idolatry spread from Babylon to every culture, right? And I had to explain this a few times because they were practicing the religion of Babylon, the religion of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, right? But then when the Most High confused the languages and spread them all over the earth, it was the same religion, but it was called something different because they spoke different tongues, okay? So understand that. The Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar later forced Hebrews to bow to the golden statue, okay? When we're looking in Daniel's chapter 3, let's grab that real quick before we move forward. Let's grab Daniel chapter 3. All right. And let me bring this here. I passed you, Daniel, my bad. All right, so looking at Daniel chapter 3, it says, starting in the first verse, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. Right. It says, and he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babel. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the viceroys, the nobles, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come into to the dedication of the image which the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 3. It says, then the viceroys, the nobles, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, everybody, all right, they came for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4 says, then the herald proudly proclaimed, to you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and language, that as soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of instruments, says you shall fall down and do the obeisance to the gold image that the king Nebuchadnezzar has set up, right? And in verse 6 he says, and whoever does not fall down and do the worship is immediately thrown into the midst of a burning furnace of fire. All right. So that was the whole story of Daniel, you know what I'm saying? And his compatriots getting thrown into the fiery furnace, so on and so forth. But that was the origin of it, right? That was the origin of the Babylonian religion, you know what I mean? Them venerating that situation as a god, all right? So by the end of the exile, right, by the end of them being exiled, the lure of the Babylonian idolatry was entrenched, right? It was something that was established then. It was something that it became ingrained in them. So even as the faithful remnants like Daniel and Ezekiel, they tried to keep the commandments, they tried to keep monotheism alive, things of that nature. But you have to understand, the stage is already set that God, he eventually brought a faithful remnant back to the land. But the concept of Babylon as a spiritual deity or an enemy was ingrained in the Hebraic thought. Okay, that's why I presented to you the Bible, the Hebrew calendar that had the month of Tammuz and things of that nature, if you remember that. Right. So you have to understand that tragically, elements of Babylon's system would reemerge in a new guise through Rome's adaptation of Christianity. Okay. And we can always go deeper into that. One day we probably will. But that's why you get the prayers to Mary, them venerating her as the mother of God and things of that nature. You know what I'm saying? It's all symbolic and it's all reminiscent, all right, of the worship of Isis, the worship of Semiramis, things of that nature. Okay, it's all syncretism. So let's talk about the Hellenistic Judaism. Okay. Now, when we get into the Hellenistic Judaism, you know, that takes us into the book of Maccabees, right? That takes us in the first Maccabees, you know what I mean, to establish it. More succinctly, I think it's like Maccabees 1 and 4, starting at verse 42 down to verse 49, right? So understand, between Babylon, the time of Babylon, right, with Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel in that situation, and when Rome came on the scene, okay, you have to understand the Greek Empire, it left a mark, all right, on the faith, right? It left a mark on the Hebrews' faith. After Alexander the Great, his conquest in the 4th century, Hellenistic culture spread across the Near East, okay, and that included Judea, all right? So many of the Jews were enticed by Greek language, by Greek philosophy, and by Greek lifestyle, right? So this led to Hellenistic Judaism. How many of you know what Hellenistic Judaism is? Okay, we'll get into that. Hellenistic Judaism is where some of the Jews tried to assimilate Torah with Greek thought. Okay, they tried to blend the two. So in the book of Maccabees and the Apocrypha, it vividly records this era. And this is about around 168 BCE, all right, where the Seleucid Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes, he aggressively imposed the Greek religion on the Israelites, right? He imposed it on them. He decreed that all should be one people and everyone should leave his laws, right? So, matter of fact, I'm gonna pull that. Let me pull that real quick. Y'all don't mind if we keep going back and forth to the scriptures. Oh, my bad. I never brought y'all back over here. Y'all was at the scriptures. All right. So let's find that real quick. Let's find that, because I know a lot of people don't really have access, or they don't really subscribe to the Apocrypha, and they probably would never read the history of the Greeks, you know what I'm saying, when they passed by. I got the wrong version of it anyways. Let me get the Apocrypha. This is the one I normally go with. All right, the KJV with the Apocrypha. All right, and let's find it. First Maccabees. What did I say? Chapter 1. And we're gonna scroll down to verse 40. We're gonna start at verse 42. Right, or verse 41. All right. It says, moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. All right. And everyone should leave his laws, So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. Okay. And then verse 44, for the king had sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and the festival days. Right. It says, and pollute the sanctuary and the holy people. They set up altars and groves and chapels of idols and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation. All right. So, and then verse 49, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. Okay. So this is very important. When you don't understand this concept, when you get into reading the New Testament, you don't understand the environment that is set up. Okay. You don't understand the environment that is set up. So when you hear Paul say things like there's neither Jew nor Greek, okay, you have to understand the Hellenistic practice that was at play. Right. There were people who were calling themselves Greeks when they were actually Israelites. Why? Because of what we just read. OK, where the Jews had where some of the Jews had consented to the king's his decree. Right. To stop dealing with the laws, profaning the Sabbath, sacrificing the swine's flesh, things of that nature. Right. And then they were no longer called that. Calling themselves Israelites, they started calling themselves Greeks. When you understand that that's the atmosphere of Christ when he comes on the scene. That's the atmosphere of Paul when he comes on the scene and he's writing his letters. When you understand it in that vein, the scriptures open up to you and they start to make more contextual sense. Okay. That's what they're dealing with. So it's important that we establish that real quick. All right. So let's get us back here. All right. So you have to understand that everything that was going on with Antiochus Epiphanes, all right, and that whole situation, it was a direct attempt to replace the covenant. Okay, that's one thing that you have to understand. That's the second. We haven't gotten there yet, but that's what Rome also did. Okay, so in the ultimate profanation, Antiochus, he erected an altar to Zeus, all right, in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem temple, and he outlawed the Torah, forbidding circumcision, Sabbath observance, and biblical feasts. Okay, and we just read that. All right, so and his goal was what? He said, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. Okay, so when you look at the ideology of Christianity today, what did they do? They forgot the law and they changed all the ordinances. Okay, so this was a direct attempt to replace the covenant. Hellenistic propaganda framed the God of Israel as just one of many gods, right? And it enticed the Hebrews to view Yah as interchangeable with Zeus. Okay, some embraced this lie. Others, like the Maccabean rebels, they resisted to death, clinging to the Most High's covenant. And you'll get into that understanding when you actually dive into First and Second Maccabees, right? And you get into the Maccabean revolt. Okay. So understand that everything that happened with in that Greek rebellion, all right, and that Greek Hellenistic portion of trying to turn the Israelites into Greeks, so on and so forth. What that did was it made it easier for later Gentiles to syncretize Yah with their own supreme God, whether it was Zeus, all right, or the Roman Dominus, which means Lord. All right. The pattern of Hellenistic oppression, it preludes what would later happen under Roman Christianity. OK, it's the exact same thing. But a lot of people lack the history because they want to read the Bible out of context and they don't want to add any historical context to what they're reading. So the Greek Empire, it sought to culturally uniform the Israelites. All right. to at the expense of the divine law. All right, talking about all should be one people. That was their whole thing. And it's crazy because when we hear the Most High say, come out from amongst them and be, you know what I'm saying, come out of them, my people, all right, that you may not partake of their plagues, so on and so forth, Revelations 18:4. Or when we read, what is it? Where Paul, because Paul got it. Matter of fact, I'm going to take us back to the scriptures. Let's get 2 Corinthians chapter 6 real quick, right? Because every time the Gentiles have influence over the word, they want to bring us into oneness with the nations. And what did we just read in Jeremiah chapter 10 for devotion? Learn not the way of the heathens, right? Learn not the way of the heathens. Did they heed that word from Jeremiah? All right. No, they didn't. All right. So let's get back into it real quick. All right. Let's get 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 16. And we'll get back to it. All right. Past it. 2 Corinthians. All right. Let's jump down to verse 17 real quick. All right. No, let's start back up here. Let's go back to verse 14. Okay. Verse 14 starts off and it says, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, right? Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Would you concur that the Israelites in the time of the of Gentile or Greek occupation, did they heed this? No, they didn't. He said, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion has light with darkness? What concord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has he that believeth with an infidel? All right. And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? Right. He says, for ye are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God. He says, and they shall be my people. Verse 17, wherefore come out from amongst them and be ye separate, saith Yahawah, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. All right. And he says, I'll be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and my daughters, saith the Almighty. Right. So, look at Christianity. Okay. In light of what the Most High said. Okay. One of the things that they hate to do is they hate a message that sounds divisive. Right. I don't like the term Black Israelites or Black Jews, right? Because it would assume if you're going to call something black, you got to assume that there's also a white, and it doesn't really work like that. Okay. Matter of fact, that's going to take me sideways, but the Most High, it's going to get me to saying something that somebody's going to take an offense to, but I want to present this message and not get your brains going, you know what I'm saying, off the beaten path. But understand that the Most High is about separation. The Most High is about division. All right. So on and so forth. And that might be an uncomfortable message, because what people don't really realize is that they were given the Gospels. They were given the scriptures presented to them from the viewpoint of a Gentile. Okay. That being the case, we have to go to Psalms. We have to go to Psalms 147 real quick. All right. We have to go to Psalms 147 and make this point. Okay. Because every time you get and you have to understand that a Gentile's agenda, it would be uniformity, would be oneness. And the Most High is talking about separation. Okay. Listen to what he says in Psalms 147, verse 19 and 20. What does he say? He says, he showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He has not dealt so with any nation. And as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye Yah. Right. The Most High did not give his word to anybody but Jacob. Okay. So we had to come out with the series that said that that Israelites, right, are the true custodians of the scriptures. Nobody is allowed to teach you this Bible except if they're not Israelites, right? But what happened, we were taught the Bible from Gentiles who circumvented the scriptures, you know what I mean, took authority over it, all right, started what they call the universal church, the Catholic Church, all right, and then taught it back to us, right? That's why I say it's not time for that Gentile salvation conversation. All right, but let's get back to it. They don't like that conversation of divisiveness or division, right? Let me play this real quick. And I'm gonna have to use my headphones just to make sure that everything is everything. I want to get your takes, you know what I mean? Because I don't see anybody commenting in the comments, but I want to get your take on what you think of this video real quick before we get into it.
Let me talk to him for a second. Listen.
About 90 to 95% of the black church in America is objectively, by the standards of scripture, heretical. I love black people, and currently there are not enough black men in America, Christian men, who know enough theology to be able to be qualified to pastor black churches. The black church in America needs to be split up. It needs to go and find a good, God-fearing white church with biblically qualified men so that they can hear the real gospel of Jesus Christ and come to saving faith in him.
You say that 90 to 95%.
All right, I don't even want to get into the rebuttal of another pastor, right? But I wanted to make a point. I wanted to make a point clear. Are you worshiping God wrong or the wrong God? Now, what that white pastor said, all right, is very, it's a lot of people get offended by what he said, right? But you have to understand it's their message. It's the gospel. He says the true gospel. Black pastors don't preach the true gospel. The black pastor's preaching the message that he got from the white theologians in the first place, right? When a black pastor goes to seminary, he's going to understand the Bible from the lens of white theologians, all right? Now, we just read in Psalms 147 where the Most High said he gave his word to Israel, right? He has not dealt so with any other nation, okay? So on and so forth. So they have no business teaching you the Bible. What I would say, all right, is that he is fundamentally right in a sense, all right? And I know a lot of people are not going to like that, but he is fundamentally right, okay? And he talks about theologically they're wrong, right? Why are they wrong? Huh? If you understand, or if they understood who they were, you'd understand that this whole thing is working in reverse. You have white theologians teaching black pastors the Bible, right? But in God's plan of things, you know what I'm saying? If there is a such thing as bringing on the Gentiles are to be taught by the children, right? You have the Gentiles teaching the children instead of the children teaching the Gentiles, right? That's just one way of looking at it. And I don't want to get too deep into it because, you know what I'm saying? It's all wrong from the beginning. The theology of Christianity, and we'll have to get, and we'll move further on in the message. You know what I'm saying? It was taught by, all right, or it was taken over by the European. You know what I mean? He wrote himself into something that had nothing to do with him, right? So that segues us into this conversation, right? And I'm hoping I'm not losing anybody, right? The rise of Roman Christianity, all right? And that would bring us to Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, all right? So in the first few centuries after Christ Yahawah and his apostles, all right, they still saw themselves as part of Israel, right? The assembly, or the how's it said in Kehila? I hope I'm saying that right. But those were those who were following Hebrew scriptures and the teachings of the Messiah. All right. They kept the Sabbath, the biblical feast. They used the Hebrew names, and they kept the Torah. Right. Fast forward to Rome, all of that stuff was outlawed. Right. Let me say that again. Christ and his disciples in every church that you read about in the scriptures, All right. They kept the Sabbath. They kept the biblical feasts. They used Hebrew names, and they kept Torah. Right. However, as the church became increasingly Gentile, pressures mounted to distance Christianity from what some folks call Judaism. Right. But it was the Hebraic scriptures. They wanted to distance Christianity from what the Most High said out of his mouth. Right. So severe Roman persecution of the Jews, such as after the Bar Kahaba, or I don't think I said that right, Kakba, that was the revolt in 135 current era, right? It made it that where anything that was seen as Jewish seemed like it was being disloyal to Rome, right? Anything Jewish was disloyal to Rome. Okay, so meanwhile, Greek philosophical influences among the church fathers like Justin Martyr or Origen, it led allegorizing the scriptures, right? Making it seem like what Most High said, he didn't really mean it. That's all allegory, right? So since they wanted to complicate the scriptures and say what the Most High said is allegory, then you had what these Roman theologians, these Catholic theologians, come up with seminaries and Bible schools, and now you got theology, pneumatology, all of these, soteriology, eschatology, all of these different thoughts of the scriptures instead of taking what the Most High said plainly, right? They complicated the whole situation. Then they taught it to you, right? They taught it to the black pastor, right? And now you have this white guy saying you ain't teaching it right. And not only that, he says, you black pastors, you need to go find you a nice white church and get under a white pastor and learn the Bible again, right? Crazy work that, you know what I'm saying, that they can't see it. They can't see it, and they won't see it if you show it to them. Right. So understand that this culminated in the 4th century when Rome Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity, supposedly. Right. So Constantine, his conversion, as the story goes, came in like 312 CE, current era. All right. And then he had the Edict of Milan happen at 313 current era. And it ended the persecution of the Christians. All right. So at the same time, that marked the beginning of the imperial control over Christianity. That's when they started taking authority over the scriptures. Right. So what Constantine did, he saw the faith as a tool to unify the empire. Right. Much like Antiochus and other rulers before him, they used the religion for political unity. Right. They turned this thing into a political weapon. Right. You had to be a subscriber to that religion in order to move up in the Senate, have a prominent seat, things of that nature. They weaponized it. Right. They even gave the popes the authority at one time or another to dispossess or depose a king from his throne. All right. They had the authority to take a king and tell him that he's no longer king. He's excommunicated, and it worked. They had that much power. All right. So while at Nicaea, all right, they had something that was called the Nicene Creed. Right. So what the Nicene Creed did, it made decisions, especially regarding the timing of Easter. Right. What was called the Resurrection Festival. All right. And they did that to like set it apart from the biblical Passover. Right. So at Nicaea, it was decided that the Christian celebration of the resurrection would no longer align with the Jewish Passover. Right. And when did the Jewish Passover start? That was the biblical date given by the Most High on the 14th of Nisan. Right. By the word of the Most High, the Passover was to be on the 14th of Nisan. This from the Most High's mouth. Right. They decided they wanted to separate themselves from what the Most High said. Right. So what they did was they held it on the Sunday following the spring equinox instead of, you know what I'm saying, the Most High's calendar, the biblical calendar. So this seems like a calendar technically, but Constantine's own words reveal a deeper agenda. Right. What does he say? After Nicaea, Constantine issued a letter to all the churches declaring it unworthy to follow Jewish practices for the holy festival. This is what he says. He says, it seemed most unworthy that in celebrating this most holy festival, we should follow the practice of the Jews who have impiously defiled their hands with numerous sins. Right? He says, let us then have nothing in common with the detestable mass of Jews. Right? And you can find that in Eusebius, The Life of Constantine, all right, book 3. Right? So what this did was, this statement, all right, it showed that the anti-Hebrew sentiment that they had, and that's what shaped the official Christian policy, right? The Christian ideology, separating itself from Israelites, or what the Most High said. And that's what's important to folks who don't read the Old Testament. They don't want to have anything to do with the New Testament. When the Bible is, or when the faith is introduced to them, they're given the instructions to start at Matthew, start in the New Testament, all right? Understand the Gospels, get Paul's letter in you, and then go back and try to piece together pieces and parts of the Old Testament, because what they declared the Old Testament to be more allegorical than literal, all right? So this is a manifestation of Gentiles taking control of something that had nothing to do with them, right? The instruction by Paul to the Gentile was not to boast against the natural branches, right? But what we see right here is Emperor Constantine boasting against the natural branches, okay? Separating Easter from Passover was just the start, okay? Because then we move into later, where you have all of the feast days no longer being observed by the people who claim to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Fast forward a little more, now you have them venerating Sunday instead of the Sabbath day, right? What the Most High said out of his mouth over and over again. And this is what is establishing the Christian theology, right? So in respect to the video, when the white dude said 95% of black pastors got theology wrong, it's all wrong. White or black, both of them are all wrong, right? Because he gave his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He has not dealt with any other nation, including Rome, including Greece, right? Including Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. He didn't give it to any of them. Right? But that's what happened. The Council of Nicaea thus institutionalized replacement theology, all right, in practice. The church would define its own identity, and it would separate itself from Israel, right? Even when that meant overriding direct commandments from the Most High Yah. So the whole premise of Christian ideology, whether it's coming from a white pastor or a black pastor, is problematic. It's all problematic, right? One of the most simplest examples is the fact that they don't know the biblical definition of sin. They don't know the biblical definition of sin, right? What'd you say, Brother Emmanuel? He says they originally followed the way. Yep. Because that's when they understood their role as Gentiles, right? Because the scriptures also always tells you, you know what I mean, to the Jew first, right? And then to the Gentile. Paul warned them not to kick against the bricks, so on and so forth. He says, you don't sustain the root sustains you. So understand the root that sustained the Gentile is the Torah. But when they came in with the replacement theology and the syncretism, that Babylonian religion, just called by a different name, right? This is what they got the whole world into. So yeah, the black pastor is theologically off. Right? All right, not gonna get stuck there. Let's keep it moving. The rise of Roman Christianity, Constantine and the Council of Nicaea. All right. So what we have on the screen, it says the Council of Laodicea in 364 current era, for example. In its canon 29, it proclaimed Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath. All right. but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day, Sunday. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema. I always say that wrong. Anathema from Christ, right? So they were excommunicating you if you followed the Bible, right? They were calling you crazy if you followed the Bible. Just like fast forward to today, you start keeping the law, statutes, and commandments, and they call you crazy, right? Constantine, he devoted sun worshipers, right? He was a Nasalaki. He was a devoted sun worshiper is what I meant to say, right? And he also promoted that blended pagan customs with Christianity faith, right? He promoted that in 1931, in 321, right? In 321 current era, he decreed Sunday, the day of the sun, as the day of rest throughout the empire instead of the biblical 7-day Sabbath, right? So and then soon after, that's when you had the Council of Laodicea, all right? And then that just went through what we just read, right? So here we see that the church, it literally outlawed obedience to the fourth commandment, right? The Christian church literally outlawed obedience to the fourth commandment, honoring the Sabbath day, right? So to honor the Sabbath as the Most High commanded is what they denigrated as Judaizing, right? And Judaizing, when you hear the word anathema, I always say that wrong. That means excommunication, right? So instead of honoring the emperor Lord's Day, you know what I'm saying? Instead of honoring the Most High, the Emperor Lord's Day was enforced. So this is a blatant example of editing covenants. Remember, we told you that when the Gentiles came in and took authority of the scriptures, they edited the covenants, right? And we saw the same thing with Epiphanies, the editing the covenants, right? So Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 7 and 25, right, came to fruition where he said that they intended to change times and laws. The Roman church, with the power of the king, the emperor, all right, it did exactly that. It changed the times, the festivals, and the calendars, right? And the laws. It set aside the Torah, right? It set the Torah aside, right? And then it fit itself into a new syncretic religion, because all Christianity is syncretism to Babylon. So the name Yahawah was nearly forgotten, right? In Greek and Latin Bibles, God was only referred to as Kryos or Dominus, which means Lord, just as Jupiter, Zeus, was called Dominus. So they made Zeus and the Most High interchangeable, right? Importantly, these changes did not come from the original apostles or from scriptures. That's the one thing that people really don't understand. So when you hear Jeremiah 6 and 16 tell you to ask for the old paths and see, right, and walk in them, this is what it's talking about. Okay, what did the apostles do when Christ went to the Father? What did they do? They kept the Sabbath day. They kept the Torah. They had all the churches in the Bible had the biblical definition of sin ingrained in them, right? But through the Roman Catholic Church and this Gentile teaching of theology to the black pastor, right? They have no clue what the biblical definition of sin is. All right. My bad. I didn't mean to keep you up there, Brother Emmanuel. All right. So by the 4th century, Christians mostly no longer kept the Sabbath. The biblical feasts like Passover, unleavened bread, Sukkot, they adopted Sunday, Easter, all right, and the elements drawn from spring solstice festivals. Also, Christmas aligned with the Roman Saturnalia, winter solstice celebrations of Sol Invictus. They took on all of that stuff, right? The name Yahawah was nearly forgotten, right? They don't know his name. They made him interchangeable with Zeus, all right, by calling him Dominus or Kryos, all right, things of that nature. So likewise, Yahushai's Hebrew name, often rendered Yeshua, all right, meaning Yah is salvation, became transliterated into Jesus, right? They have no clue on who that is. You know what I mean? You say Yahawah, they don't know who that is. All right. So, but you know what I'm saying? Even though like some people still subscribe to the name Jesus, like all of the names in the Bible, the Hebrew names had meaning. So when you say Jesus, it takes away the meaning that Yahshua had, right? Yah is salvation. You have no understanding of that. So for instance, in Constantine time, Sol Invictus, all right, which was the unconquered sun, was a popular deity. He was a popular god, right? Constantine himself minted coins with the cross and the sun god together, right? Showing you the blending of those things. Thus, as masses of pagans entered the church after Christianity became the state religion, they brought their Babylonian and Greco-Roman ideas with them, right? That's all they did was basically swap labels. They brought in the sun worship and they put the biblical names on top of them, right? They created a theology, right, to create this complicated path to make their religion make sense, right? The Most High kept it simple. He said, keep the Torah and live, right? He said, I set before you life and death, blessings and curses, right? The life and the death that he set before them was to obey the Torah or to not obey it. Obeying the Torah was the life, not obeying it was the death. That was simple, right? 1 John chapter 3, verse 4 gives us the biblical definition of sin, making it simple. He who sins transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law, making it simple, right? But when they came in with this nonsense and foolishness, you know what I mean? They made it difficult. So this white pastor has all the room in the world to say that 90 to 95% of black pastors are theologically flawed, right? They created it. So, anyways, masses of pagans, they entered the church after Christianity became the state religion. They brought their Babylonian and Greco-Roman ideas with them, so on and so forth. What did they do? They called their sun god worship Christian, right? But they retained many of the same practices and mindsets of the sun worshipers. The Babylonian beast system, now clothed in church vestments, effectively took over the visible church. That's how you got churchianity today. Those are just facts. These are receipts. When one thing that you need, if you're going to study the Bible, you need the history to go with it, right? Worshiping God wrong or the wrong God. All right. Let's get into this real quick. Supersessionism. What is supersessionism? Right? Something we talk about a lot, right? Replacing the chosen people and their God, right? Romans 11 and verse 1 says, I say then, has God cast away his people? God forbid, right? For I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin, right? That's your boy Paul speaking. He has not cast away his people. He has not replaced his people with the Gentiles, right? He did not give authority of his word from the Israelites and give it to the Roman Catholic Church, right? That didn't happen, right? A key aspect of this grand deception was the doctrine of supersessionism or replacement theology, right? The idea that the church has replaced Israel as God's chosen people, right? They call themselves spiritual Jews, right? God divorced Israel, right? And through Jesus, we're under the new covenant, you know what I'm saying, and his blood, and we are the new spiritual Israelites, right? That's their theology, right? So this teaching took root as early as the 2nd century with church writers like Justin Martyr, and by Constantine's era, it was the official position, right? It provided theological justification for all the changes we've described already, right? If Israel is cast off by God, then the church, largely Gentile, inherits all the promises, right? And if they inherit all the promises, then they can redefine the faith however they see fit. And that's exactly what they did, right? So Romans chapter 11, verses 17 and 18, all right? What does Paul tell the people? All right. He told the Gentiles, he says, do not boast against the branches, i.e., do not disparage the Jews, right? Don't sit up there and act like you have a bigger position than them, right? So what does he say? He says, for if God did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare the arrogant wild branches either. Okay, so tragically, this warning went unheeded, right? By the 4th century, the Gentile church was boasting against the natural branches. And not only were they boasting against the natural branches, they were persecuting them, right? And anybody that wanted to follow what the Most High said, they were putting them to death, right? Councils, they passed canons forbidding Christians to even eat with the Hebrews, or to observe the Sabbath day, or to observe Passover, right? So the rich Hebraic heritage of the faith was denounced as Judaizing. Don't get called Judaizing, right? And a new Christian identity was formed. And that new Christian identity was detached from the old covenant people, right? It's a whole new religion than what you're reading about in the Bible. Okay. So Romans chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, right? Because you have to understand something real quick, right? This had severe consequences, right? And tragic consequences, because even to this day, they come up with theology that says things like once saved, always saved, right? So by severing ties with the Hebrew people, all right, in the Hebrew context and the Hebrew scriptures, the church also severed itself from accountability to the Torah and the prophets and truth, right? They don't have the accountability that the Israelites had if they were to disobey the Most High. Now they have it in them, the power to interpret the scriptures, you know what I'm saying, and how whichever way seems comfortable, right? Whichever way is more beneficial to them, right? So in a sense, when Portugal and Spain went conquering the whole planet under the name of Jesus and the Roman Catholic Church, right? They basically made a way where their God justified everything that they did, right? If they went over there with the doctrine of discovery and found out that these people weren't Christians, they had the right to put them in slavery, right? They had the right to take their land. They had the right to do whatever they wanted to do, right? It all got distorted and it's ugly. But anyways, let me get back to it. All right. The scripture says of Israel, all right, and Romans chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, what advantage has the Jew, right? What advantage has the Hebrew, right? Much in every way. Firstly, all right, chiefly because that unto them were committed the words of God, right? He gave his word unto Jacob. He did not give it to anybody, especially Rome. He gave his word unto Jacob. His statutes and judgments unto Israel is not dealt so with any nation. Let me read that again. Romans 3, verses 1 and 2. What advantage has the Jew? Much in every way, all right, or chiefly, because that unto them were committed the oracles of God. All right. Once the Gentile church fathers decided they no longer needed those oracles in their original form, they became susceptible to every wind of pagan doctrine, tossed to and fro, as Paul says, right? The father of lies. This is why we started with this in John chapter 8, you know what I'm saying, when we first started this conversation, right? The father of lies, false teachers inspired by the adversary, filled the vacuum with man-made dogmas, right? So over time, Christian theology absorbed Greek mythology, Greek, Salaki, let me get some water. All right. So over time, Christian theology absorbed Greek mythology. All right. Like the immortality of the soul, which was more Platonic than it was biblical. Right. And the Christian practice absorbed pagan rituals like lighting candles to saints, veneration of the mother and child images, reminiscent of Isis and Horus, Ishtar and Tammuz, for example, right? Things that we bring out all the time. You don't read anything that they practice in church in the Bible, and we're giving you the reason why, right? So it is a matter of, are you worshiping God wrong, or are you just worshiping the wrong God, period? Right? So the pure monotheism of Israel was diluted with notions of divine hierarchy, all right, that was familiar to pagans. The second commandment prohibited the prohibition of graven images, right? Remember how the Most High said not to create for yourself engraven images of any likeness, right? Well, they broke that off the rip, right? They nullified that, you know what I'm saying, as the churches began to be filled with statues and icons and things of that nature, right? The dietary laws were abandoned, and they were even mocked, right? Despite Isaiah chapter 66 and verse 17 warning that in the end time, God will judge those eating unclean things like swine's flesh, right? They gave themselves the ability and the authority to ignore that, right? So the net effect was that the outward form of Christianity became an amalgam of the Roman state religion, right? And a superficial reading of the Bible. Okay, that's why they cherry pick this, that, and the third, and most of what they use to defend themselves is coming straight from Paul. Right? It is what it is. So they're devoid of the Hebrew mindset that gave the Bible its coherence. That's why they don't understand what they're reading. And yet, he's right. The black pastor is theologically flawed. Right? So by replacing the people of Israel, right, the church leaders also claimed the covenants for themselves, right? And they reinterpreted them non-literal in a whole bunch of non-literal ways, right? Like the new covenant that was prophesied in Jeremiah 31 and 31, right? It was to be made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? But now was claimed by predominantly Gentile churches, which divorced itself from Israel, right? Started its own thing. So, starting to lose my voice a little bit. So, if you're peeping and you're understanding, that's a fundamental contradiction of the Bible. All right. Everything that they do is a fundamental contradiction of the Bible, and they get mad at me for calling it out. Right. So, to maintain the claim, the church taught that it was now the new Israel. Right. And that God's promises to literal Israel were void, or to be allegorically applied to the church. Okay, so this served to further erase the name of Yahawah and the identity of his people, all right, from the Christian conscience, right? If you had a Hebraic thought, you would know ain't no way in hell that there's a Good Friday, right? You don't have a Hebraic thought, so you can't understand. You know what I'm saying? That there's no such thing as Good Friday, right? You don't get, when you have a Hebraic thought, that he rose Sunday morning. The Bible doesn't say that he rose Sunday morning, right? Which is their excuse for trading in the 7-day Sabbath for Sunday rest day or whatever, right? It is what it is, right? So understand something. Whereas once God was known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all right, and the imperial church, he was more often referred to philosophically the unmoved mover, etc., right? Or generically, he was the Lord. He became the Lord, right? So fealty sworn to the institutional church and its creeds rather than the covenant Yah made with Israel, right? Thus, through supersessionism, Christianity attempted to usurp the place of Israel, ironically fulfilling exactly what Paul cautioned them against. Right? Paul tried to warn them against that. So as Christ Yahawah taught, all right, if the root, which is Israel's covenant, is rejected, the branch cannot bear real fruit. Right? Go to John chapter 15, verse 4 and 6, right? What does he say? He says, abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, no more can ye except ye abide in me. He says, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch and is withered, and men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. Right? So you can't have sound theology through supersessionism. Right? You're not replacing the Most High's chosen people. Right? You're not assuming the position of his promises to his people. Okay. So the fruit that grew on these severed branches, right? These severed branches that divorced itself from the Torah and from Israel, right? It was a corrupt mix, a religion that preached love, but often practiced persecution, right? Check your history, right? Check your history. Look at the Crusades or the Inquisitions against the heretics or the Jews, right? Things of that nature, right? That held a form of godliness but denied the power thereof, right? Held the form of godliness. So another striking indicator of worship going strange and going awry is the loss of the Most High's name, right? That's just another blaring example. In the Hebrew scriptures, the Creator revealed his personal name, Yahawah, to Moses in Exodus 3:15. Right? So, and I know a lot of folks go by Yahuwah, things of that nature. You know what I'm saying? Condemnation comes in at their hardened hearts and their ears to the truth. Khan. All right. So, where was I? The Most High's name, it appears in the scriptures 7,000 times. All right. And he also gave his son a name above all names. All right. Which we subscribe to Yahawah, and we know some subscribe to Yahusha, things of that nature. But it means Yah is salvation. All right. So known in Aramaic/Hebrew as Yeshua or Yehoshua. Yet today, the vast majority of Christians do not call on these names at all. They use titles like Lord for Father and the Greco-Latin name Jesus for the Son. Right? Does it matter? Biblically, names carry identity and authority. So I would say, yeah, it does matter. They be like, well, the name still works. It still works. But see, we got to get back to the conversation. What God is you worshiping? When you say that it worked, when you say you called on this name and it worked, how can you be so sure? How can you be so sure that what is answering your prayer is not a different deity? And then they would be like, well, why would God do that? Well, when you look in 2 Thessalonians, he said he's going to set up a stumbling block for those who have not a love for the truth. Right? You don't love the truth. So when you're calling on the name, you're calling on Jesus, right? And we could get into when Christ prophesied that when one comes in his own name, he says, I come in my Father's name and you don't hear me. But when one comes in his own name, him, you'll hear. We can get into that whole prophecy. But why not just go to Matthew chapter 7 and verse 23? When he talks about all of the people, who said they did a whole bunch of stuff in his name. And he says, I never knew you. Right? Are you worshiping God wrong simply? Is it that simple? Or are you worshiping the wrong God? Right? It is what it is. Not going to stay there. All right. How can people, call on a name if they have been taught that it is irrelevant, or in some circles, they were taught that it was forbidden to use, right? They got the infallible name doctrine, right? Jeremiah, he prophesied a terrible thing. Right. When we look in Jeremiah 23 and verse 27, right, he says people will forget the Most High's name for Baal, right? The Lord. Right. So shockingly, this is exactly what happened in Christianity. By substituting the Lord for the Most High's name, the church inadvertently fulfilled this prophecy. Right. And I think Satan had that plan all along, but the church inadvertently fulfilled that prophecy. okay, causing people to forget his name for Lord. The Hebrew word Baal means Lord, and was the title of the Canaanite deity, right? Thus calling the God of Israel simply Lord blurs the distinction between him and Baal, right? In Hosea chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, it foretells a reversal of this, saying one day Israel will no longer call God Baali, right, my Lord, but Ishi, my husband. And God will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth. Those implications is that using pagan titles for Yah is displeasing to him, right? He wants to be known by his true name, right? Get his true name. Go to Psalms chapter 68 and verse 4, right? Sing to Elohim, sing praises to his name. Raise up a highway for him who rides through the deserts by his name, Yah, and exalt before him. Okay. Salakia. But Christianity, however, systematically removed the name. All right. Pious Jewish scribes had already started the practice of saying Adonai, right, which means Lord or teacher, instead of pronouncing, the tetragrammaton, right? The early church carried this tradition forward without explaining the importance of the name to Gentile converts. Soon the original name was all but lost to Christendom, right? They have no clue on who you're talking about, right? Only in matter of fact, I prayed in the name of, what I'm saying? I prayed to Yahawah, Ba Shema Mashiach, Yahawah Shai. You know what I'm saying? And the Christians that heard it thought I was saying something foul and wanted to distance themselves from what I was talking about, right? Had no clue. So, you know what I mean? I know what that feels like. I know what that looks like. Yakurium, Shalom says, what's really interesting about it all is that Christian banter isn't even organic to the times. The confidence and structure of their rebuttal goes back to their forefathers. Exactly. And they don't have these receipts to show where their forefathers got it from, right? Or how biblically unsound it is. So, all right. So let's get back to it. The absence of the name has theological consequences, right? Because it's deep. It goes in real deep, and they don't really assume that it's that big a deal. If I say God, if I say Jehovah, if I say Jesus, has no big this, that, and the third, theologically, right? But it has consequences. It has consequences, right? How do I want to say it? All right. Soon the original name was all but lost to Christians. All right. So only in recent times have some scholars and believers began to restore Yahawah in translations and prayers. All right. The absence of the name has consequences. In pagan Rome, there were many lords, right? The emperor was Lord, right? Jupiter was Lord. Okay. The nobleman, you know what I'm saying, when he was being addressed by somebody who was beneath him was Lord, right? When the slave said, massa, he was saying Lord, right? Understand that. There was consequences. When the pagans, when they heard Christians talk about the Lord, all right, he could mentally map that into his concept of lordship, right? This made conversations easier. Okay, no need to change one's view of the deity much, but at the cost of true knowledge of Yahawah, right? The scriptures told us to grow in grace and in the knowledge of Jesus Christ, right? If that was true for you, then you would no longer call him Jesus Christ. You would actually call him his name if you grew in the knowledge of him, right? Jesus became the name disconnected from his Hebrew roots, right? Some in ignorance even linked it to Zeus. All right. Or to the Greek healing of God, Jesus, right? Well, linguistically, the name Jesus is a result of translation or transliteration and not a deliberate homage to Zeus, right? We understand that. And we did a breakdown of the names, so on and so forth, to show you how they ended up from Yahshua or Joshua. All right. And then transliterated it through through Greek and then through Latin, and then putting the J and the hook on it and getting Jesus, right? We went through that whole scenario on how that happened. So while linguistically the name Jesus is a result of transliteration, so on and so forth, it still remains that the power and meaning of Yahawa's real name was lost, right? Like they don't understand that he is salvation, you know what I'm saying? And then they end up turning him into an idol, right? I would say it's very consequential, because they turned the one who was supposed to be the door, right? Because he says no man may come into the Father but by me. Now he is the Father, right? They have that theology going on now. So Yah is salvation. It encapsulates the identity of the Son as the embodiment of Yah's saving power. Remove Yah and that identity is obscured. Right? And a lot of people be like, the names don't matter, it doesn't matter, so on and so forth. Right? Why does it matter? Right? Because to worship in truth, we must know who we worship. Right? We got to know who we worship. John said, the hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Right? For the Father also does seek such to worship him. Right? So why does it matter? Because worship in truth must, you know what I'm saying, we must know who we worship in. Right? A lot of people don't know that they're worshiping a strange God. Right? John chapter 4 and verse 22, where Christ is talking to the Samaritan woman. He says, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is of the Yehudim. Right? It is entirely possible for you to think that you worship in God and worship in Satan. Right? He taught that the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. So to worship in truth means to worship Yah as he is, by his name that he gave he self-revealed, you know what I mean, unto us. Right? Understand that. To worship the truth, to worship in truth means to worship Yahawah as he is, by his true self revelation, which includes his name, his character, and his commandments. Right? If one worships God, all right, but doesn't know his name or disregards his actual words, is that fully in truth? No, it is not. Right? It calls to mind Yahawah's declaration, right? When we just spoke about it in Matthew chapter 7 and 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father. Right? Now, since the Gentiles none taught you the Bible, right? None taught you all of their pagan religions, you know what I mean, with Christian names and so on and so forth. Since they've done that, this is you, knowing not who you worship, right? And not knowing the will of God, right? He even predicted that many will protest on Judgment Day, right? That they did mighty works in his name, only to hear him say, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work in lawlessness, right? Yep. So the people who call Jesus Lord, yet practice lawlessness, right? I.e. disregard God's Torah, as Emperor Constantine them did when they separated Easter from Passover, when they separated the Sabbath day from Sunday, right? These same people are practicing lawlessness. It's precisely described, that precisely describes mainstream Christianity, right? Loud and clear. Right? Right? They're real loud and calling on Lord, Lord. But by abolishing the Torah, they became workers of lawlessness. Right? They taught that the new God, right? They taught that, they taught that they knew God, right? But Yahawah says, I never knew you. Right? Because they never truly knew him or his Father, and having rejected the key elements of the relationship, which is his commandments. Right? Essentially, they were worshiping a false image of God, a lawless Christ, right? Of their own making, right? When you create a God in your mind that you're comfortable with, that's idolatry, right? That's not worshiping Yahawah, all right? And that's not worshiping the Father. It is what it is. Let's keep it moving. Right. So All right. So this is why knowing the name and the nature of Yah and Yahawah is so important. It's so critical. Right. The name represents authority and alignment. Right. Scripture says in Colossians 3:17, whatever you do in word or in deed, do all in the name of the Master Yahawah. Right. And also in Acts chapter 4 and verse 12, it says, there is no deliverance in anyone else, for there is none other name under the heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Right. So the names are important. If believers don't even know that name, how easily can deception slip in? Right. Roman Christianity taught people to trust in the authority of the church, the authority of the Pope, the authority of the bishops, right? Instead of the authority of the Most High Yah and of the name, right? But what did the apostles say, right? When they were let out of the prison and told not to call on that name no more in Acts chapter 5 and 29. They said, we must obey Elohim rather than man. Okay. And then you have folks who pile up in church on Sunday assuming that they're obeying the voice of God, when in reality they are obeying the voice of man. It is what it is. So who authority do we submit to, right? Paul says in Romans chapter 6 and verse 16, right? He says, you are the servant of the one you obey, right? Understand that. Says, because Paul, he writes in Romans that either sin or obedience will be your master. Okay. The one we obey is effectively our God. So if God tells us to honor the Sabbath day, but we make excuses for why we ain't got to, then what God is you worshiping? If the Most High says, you know what I'm saying, not to eat unclean, all right, or the abomination of things of that nature, and then you make excuses of why you ain't got to do that, then what God is you worshiping? Right? If you're celebrating Easter instead of Passover, what God is you worshiping? Right? If Christians claim to worship God, right, but obey doctrines originating in Babylon or in Rome or in Greece, right? And all of these things contradicts the Most High's commands. By Paul's definition, they are the servants of the wrong God. Right? They carry the wrong name on their forehead spiritually. Remember when the Most High, you know what I mean, comes back in Revelations, he says he's going to spare those who has the name of Yah in their head, in their foreheads. Right? So understand that. They're not going to have Yah's seal, but they're going to have the mark of Babylon. So this is harsh for some folks, but it's biblical. This is hard for some people to hear, but it's biblical. Revelation, it contrasts those who have the Father's name written in their foreheads in Revelations 14:1, right? With those who receive the mark of the beast in Revelations 13 verses 16 and 17, right? It's an issue of who you worship and obey. That should mean something. That should be important to you. That should be important to know. Okay. So all these threads, they come together in the apocalyptic prophecies in the book of Revelations, right? Where John has these visions on Patmos, right? And he exposes the end game of false worship, right? He exposes the end game of false worship. In Revelation chapter 17, looking at verses 3-5, he says, and he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast covered with the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and adorned with the gold and precious stones and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup filled with the abominations of the filthiness of her whoring. And upon her forehead, the name written, a secret, Babylon the Great, the mother of whores and of the abominations of the earth. Right? So Paul was given the imagery, all right, of the 7-headed beast, so on and so forth. You know what I'm saying? And it was a vivid imagery, and it was not a mere fantasy, right? It represented a religious system, a harlot, all right, in collusion with political power, all right, the beast, right? And I think I was trying to bring that out a couple of Shabbats ago. But the woman is drunk with the blood of the saints, showing that she has persecuted the true believers. She took the true believers into slavery, right? She downtrots them down to this day. They bear the mark of the curses because of her to this day, right? She drinks the blood of the saints, right? So she commits fornication with the kings of the earth, meaning an illicit union of church and state, right? When Pope made made Christianity the state religion, right? So those who were worshiping the sun, they had to convert to Christianity to get a high position in the political office, right? Same political game, you know what I'm saying, that your presidents play, you know, how they claim to be, you know what I'm saying, born again Christians and this and that, right? Whatever, to win favor with the right or whatever, all right? So upon her forehead is written, Mystery Babylon the Great. The label Babylon is deliberate, right? That's why we took you into Nebuchadnezzar. We took you into the Tower of Babel to show you, all right, that the label Babylon is deliberate. It tells us this false church carries on the legacy of ancient Babylon's idolatry and confusion, right? That's why we had to take you there, to bring you all the way here, right? It's a mystery religion, a secret blend of truth and error masquerading as the true faith, right? To their forefathers writing to the Yehudim. My bad, I'm probably late posting that. Right? So interpreters throughout history, including many Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and Calvin, all right, they recognize elements of this vision in the Roman church. The city on 7 hills, according to Revelation 17:9, can be identified with Rome. All right. And then you hear a lot of Seventh-day Adventists pointing this out about Rome. Right, the imagery of the beast in Revelation 17:9, you know what I'm saying, mimics a lot of Rome, right? Gives you that symmetry, right? The harlot clothed the purple and scarlet and her golden cup, all right, evoke the opulence of Rome's eschatological pageantry, right? Ecclesiastical, Salakia, I'm reading too fast. All right, but Revelation's warning isn't just about one institution. It's about any and all systems that perpetrate the Babylonian mixture of politics, false doctrine, and the persecution of those who carry the truth. Right. The beast represents an empire, right? Like Italy, Rome, later manifestations as well as like the United States. Right. And the harlot represents compromised religion that rides the beast. Okay. Roman Christianity fits this deception. After Constantine, the church rode the Roman imperial beast. Later, the papacy itself became a sort of beast, a political, religious kingdom that dominated medieval Europe. Right? Those are facts. Those are receipts. Okay, we can pull that up. The system carried over Babylon's DNA. Right? What was Babylon's DNA? Sun worship. Babylon's DNA was sun worship camouflaged as Christian practice. Worship of Samaritans / Ishtar, rebranded as the veneration of Mary. Ain't that, I mean, it's obvious. It should be obvious. A priestly hierarchy, all right? Pomp, reminiscence of Babylon's clergy, and a fundamental opposition to the saints who kept God's commandments, right? Those who kept the commandments and upheld the testimony of Christ Yahawah. Right, they buck against them, they fight against them, they persecute them to this day. So, for instance, Christians who protested and tried to return to biblical practices, all right, whether they were Seventh-day Adventists, Sabbatarian groups, early Christian Jewish people, so on and so forth, they were often labeled as heretics for trying to do what? Do what the Most High said in the Bible. They were called heretics. right? I had a lady tell me I was in a cult because I do what the Bible says, right? So truly the harlot was drunk with the blood of the set apart ones, according to Revelations 17 and verse 6, right? The Babylonian beast and prophecy, all right? Identifying the real enemy, identifying who you really worshiping, right? Revelations chapter 13, right? Because it's often interpreted as the false prophet or the papal power, right? That performs miracles and enforces the worship of the first beast, right? It causes the world to receive the infamous mark of the beast, right? What does he say? Revelations 13 and verse 16 and 17, it says, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark upon their right hand or upon their foreheads, and that no one should be able to buy or sell except he that has the mark of the beast, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name, which is 666. Right? So while theories about what the mark is, is it a microchip? Is it so on and so forth? Is it your phone? Is it your ideology? Right? You have to understand that at its core, it signifies allegiance, right? So in contrast, Revelation chapter 14 and verse 1 shows the lamb's faithful having the Father's name in their forehead, right? And in Revelations 14 and 12 defines the saints as those who are keeping the commandments of Elohim and have the belief in Christ, right? So the mark of the beast then is the opposite of those things. Wouldn't you agree? Those who reject Yahawah's name and commands in favor for the beast's authority, that go along to get along, that herd mentality, right? Just like the Christians today believe that their faith is legit and is valid because there's more people believing this thing than it is following the Torah, right? That's democracy. They think they got a right to vote who they want God to be instead of God saying who he is in his word, right? Since the majority believe it this way, right? No, that's off. Many Protestant commentators have noted that enforcing Sunday observance in place of the Sabbath could be seen as the beast mark of authority, right? Like that's why I was bringing you back to ideology, right? Which is a sign of God's, the church even claims that, it had the power to change the Sabbath, right? The Catholic Church did that, which is a sign of God's authority in scripture. So whether or not one agrees with that specific identification, the large point still stands, right? True worship, right? Signified by obedience to God's Torah, right? And holding on to the testimony of Yahawah, right? Is the dividing line from false worship. Obedience, to the beast system is on the other side of that mark in the sand, right? So what does he say? Revelations 18 and 4 gives you the command, right? It gives you a thundering call from heaven. Come out from amongst her, right? What does it say? Revelations 18 and 4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and lest you receive of her plagues, right? So this is the Most High pleading with all who are his, right? Because I say that whole argument with the white pastor versus the black pastor is because that whole situation is reversed. If anything, the black pastor is supposed to be teaching the white pastor the Bible. Okay, that's why I don't even get into that whole Gentile salvation conversation. It's neither here nor there, right? But it is what it is. But no, he still calls them my people. Even though they're being taught by white theologians, he still calls them my people. Right? Meaning many of God's own are currently in these deceived churches, right? But they are commanded to come out, right? For their own salvation. They have to come out of that wicked Babylonian system. It's not enough to say you believe it your way and I believe it my way, right? No, it's a matter of life and death, right? You have been fed a false doctrine, right? from your enemy, right? From your enemy. It is what it is. The time comes when remaining in a spiritual adulterous system makes one culpable in its sins, right? So when the Most High says, lest you receive of her plagues, when he rains down fire and brimstone on these devils and you holding hands with it, guess what's going to happen to you? Right? The call to come out of Babylon in the last days echoes the call that went to the Jews in ancient Babylon to leave and return to Jerusalem. Right? But spiritually, it means to leave every vestige of false religion, of false worship, right? False doctrine, right? And every corrupt authority that is not of the Most High Yah. It means practically unlearning a lot of inherited traditions. The prophet Jeremiah, right? When we get to Jeremiah 16 and verse 19, he voices this realization. He says, the nations will come to you from the ends of the earth and say, our fathers have inherited lies, right? Futility, all right, and things of no profit, right? So we see this awakening now. But, you know, since we see it and we got back to keeping Torah, they say we're in a cult, right? It's crazy. But there's a lot of folks who are discovering that customs like Christmas, Easter, Sunday, and etc. are not commanded by the Most High, but they are the traditions inherited from centuries of syncretism, right? They're saying, why do we do these things, right? The answer often traces back to Constantine in Rome, not to Yahawah or the father Yahawah, all right? You don't even see that practiced by the apostles. So thus they fulfilled Jeremiah's words, you know what I'm saying, and confessing that they received lies from their ancestors. They inherited lies from their ancestors. And that's one thing that the black pastor doesn't want to admit to. He doesn't want to come to terms, or the Christian period, right? That they've inherited lies. Their ancestors inherited lies. So the good news is this, though. That prophecy also shows a restoration. Okay. Understand that. Prophecy shows a restoration. In the end, a remnant returns to the old paths. Right. And God bless you. The Most High Yah and Christ bless you. All right. If that is you in these last days. Right. Revelation's vision of the 144,000 with the Father's name and the great multitude who washed their robes, according to Revelation 7 and 9. And verse 14, all right, indicates a purification of worship, right? Zechariah 14 prophesies that survivors of the nations will come to Jerusalem, right, to worship Yah and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, right? And what does that show us? That shows us that the true worship as given to Israel will be vindicated. They're going to return to it. Right? The Messiah Yahawah himself said that he didn't come to abolish the Torah or the prophets, but to fulfill and uphold them. All right. And he says, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle will by any means pass from the Torah till all be fulfilled. So if Christianity had believed him, it wouldn't have discarded so easily what was precious to the Most High, the Sabbath day, the feast days, the dietary laws. Right? Understand that. The final conflict described in Revelations chapter 12 and 17 is the dragon's war against those who keep the commandments of God. Right? And this is all taking place at the end of the age. You understand that? At the end of the age, there will be a body of believers who return to the obedience of the true faith of Yahawah, right? And that's going to provoke the wrath of the dragon, Satan, right? And his beast system. So in other words, God is raising up people who will worship him as the Most High Yah originally intended them to, right? Exposing the imposture of the harlot church, right? It's going to expose that church that you pile into every Sunday as the imposter harlot church. So in conclusion, yeah, for sure. I'm hitting up the comments a little late. Salakia. For sure. The evidence is overwhelming. Much of what passes for Christian worship today, it didn't originate in the Bible, right? And it's like pulling teeth trying to get them to see that, right? But everything, you know what I'm saying, that originated in Christianity, or what passes for Christian today, right, was originated in the Babylonian Roman tradition, right? And what that did was it systematically changed God's covenants and persecuted the chosen people, right? Understand that. Sincere individuals within Christianity may truly love God. But as Yahawah noted, all right, in Isaiah and John chapter 6 and verse 2, right, they can be doing wrong, though they think they offer God service. You get that, right? That's why this message is important. The time for ignorance is past. Right now, the Most High Yah is illuminating those truths, and he calling his people to repentance and restoration. Right. So the choice each believer faces is the same choice Moses put before Israel. Right. Right. And that's what Joshua, later proposed when we get to Joshua 24 and verse 15. Right. He says, choose this day whom you will serve. Right. And then he says, will it be Yahawah, the one true Elohim, or the gods of the nations? And right now, Christians have chosen the gods of the nations over the Most High Yah. Right? You can't serve both. So understand, we must reject the Babylonian beast system, its lies, its pagan festivals, its disregard for the Torah. All right? We have to disregard those things, right? I mean, we have to reject those things, and we have to return to pure worship of the Most High Yah, right? So what does John verse 16 and verse 2 and 3 says, right? What does Christ say? He says, they shall put you out of the congregations, but an hour is coming when everyone who kills you shall think he is rendering service to Elohim. You got that? He says, and this they shall do to you because they do not know the Father nor me. So all of the persecution that you receive for trying to do it the Most High's way, understand that Christ seen it. He already told you it was coming. He already told you it was coming. They shall put you out of the congregations. And some of us had to live that reality. Some of us had to live that reality. Shabbat shalom, brother Brian Woods. He's coming in. The semantics. It doesn't matter what color a joker is. It says, if you're not in the truth, I'm not inclined to hear much of nothing, especially if they won't yield to them receipts, for sure. But I get what the word is saying, for sure. For sure. All right, a couple more and we out of here. So, returning to the pure worship, all right, or returning to worship in spirit and in truth. Okay. So this means embracing the fullness of God's revelation, calling upon his true name, Yahawah, with reverence, honoring his Sabbaths and appointed times. It says, and keeping his commandments by the empowerment of his spirit. It means accepting Yahawah as he truly is, all right, the Hebrew Messiah, the Lion of Judah, right, who upheld his father's law and exposed man-made traditions, rather than the sanitized European Jesus of art and tradition, who often looks oddly similar to Apollos and Zeus, right? And that wasn't by coincidence or, by accident, all right? It requires humility to admit that for centuries of church tradition, they were mistaken or they were even deceived, right? A lot of people are not humble enough to admit that. But an academic and honest look at history compels that admission, right? We have cited Constantine's own letter, right? We came through and showed you the canons, right? And scripture after scripture to demonstrate these points. The editing of the covenants by the church authority was not done under God's inspiration, but in fulfillment of Paul's warnings that after his departure, what did he say in Acts 20:29? He said, after his departure, savage wolves will come in, not sparing the flock. Right? He says, for I know this, that after my departure, savage wolves shall come in among you, not sparing the flock. Also from among yourselves men shall arise, speaking distorted teachings to draw away the taught ones after themselves. Right? Those wolves had their day, right? But their tenure is ending, you know what I mean? And the truth is shining forward. Right? So in the spirit of passionate reformation, we declare enough is enough. The Most High said, come out of her, my people. All right. And you know what I'm saying? We implore you all to heed the Most High's word at that. Right. The reformers of old who confronted the excesses of the medieval churches, like the, you know what I mean? We went into the Maccabean revolt and things of that nature. All right. We implore you to study that. And this is not about one denomination versus another. We could care less about what your denomination is. If you received your theology and it came down through the annals of the Roman Catholic Church, you are off. If you're not reading the Bible with a Hebraic thought, you are off. Right? Your theology is off. So it doesn't matter what denomination you claim, right? So y'all can stop arguing with each other. Y'all all are wrong. Right? But it's a call to individuals in every assembly to examine whether their worship aligns with the biblical truth or if it aligns with Babylonian tradition. Okay? The academic evidence is there. It's on the table, right? The receipts are there. They're on the table. The scriptural mandate is clear, right? Now is the time for what the prophet Elijah, he asked at Mount Carmel, right? When we're looking at 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 21, it says, and Eliyahu came to all the people and said, how long would you keep hopping between two opinions? Right? If Yahawah is Elohim, follow him. And if Baal, follow him. But the people answered him not a word. Right? That's the same thing we say. So the world's Christendom has tried to follow a mix. Right? A little of Yahawah here, a little of Baal there. Right? It says Elijah's challenge and from the fire from heaven that followed showed that Yahawah demands exclusive worship. Right? You cannot serve two masters. Right? And oh yeah, I was so late with it. So hopefully you got something out of today's Bible study. That's how we dealing with it today. That's how we're dealing with it today. We're coming with it. Are you worshiping God wrong or the wrong God entirely? Right? Brother Brian Woods, Shabbat Shalom. He says, we must examine ourselves daily, or examine ourselves and die daily. Yep. But we got to examine whether, you know what I'm saying, we are doing something out of tradition, or if we're doing something out of, you know what I'm saying? Because we're out of biblical mandate. Are we doing something out of tradition, or are we doing something because we were biblically mandated to do it? All right. And that's the question a lot of folks have to ask. And then I meant to put this in the comments earlier. You know what I mean? In case somebody wanted to click the link and have a comment, so on and so forth. You know what I'm saying? I meant to do that 2 Shabbats ago. I kept forgetting. Right? But if not, I'll keep it there. You know what I'm saying? And you know what I'm saying? Feel free to come in and holler at me during Bible study. I'll put it in the link. I'll put the link in the comments. You know what I mean? Starting a little bit earlier. You know what I'm saying? So Yahshar'al, if you ever wanted to click the link and come in, you know, I ain't mean to click that comment. You know what I'm saying? You're more than welcome. Cause I know a lot of times we be talking, and then I move from one thing to the next. You know what I'm saying? And I don't get to see a comment, or I'll post a comment and it's way past the time when, you know what I'm saying, a person had posted it. You know what I'm saying? So we'll continue to grow, you know what I mean, and try implementing different things, so on and so forth. But we hope that you got something out of today's Bible study. If you would be so kind, just hit the like button. You know what I'm saying? If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, we ask that you do that as well. And the Most High willing, you know what I'm saying, we'll be back with another Shabbat Bible study. So I want to give a quick shout out to Yakurium, Shabbat Shalom, Quam 12, Shabbat Shalom, Brother Emmanuel, Shabbat Shalom to you as well, Brother Brian Woods who came in, Shabbat Shalom out. See who I can see. Sister Alice Bronson, thanks for the share. Sister Teresa Rooks, thank you for the share as well. Amen. It's not letting me see a whole lot of folks, but just know that I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody for coming through. And all right. So yeah, we'll leave it there. We'll leave it there. All right. So like I said, hopefully you got something out of today's Bible study. You know what I'm saying? And we appreciate everybody for coming through. All right. Most High, you know what I'm saying? All praises to the Most High. And we're trying to work on that delivery. Hey, you know what? I found something real funny. You know what I'm saying? I was watching one of my videos back, and it was so hard for me to listen to myself because I stutter so daggone much. I definitely have to work on that. I'm gonna definitely work on that. But all right, so that's Bible study, everybody. Appreciate you, love you, you know what I'm saying? And you know what I'm saying, give your all to the Most High today. Keep your eyes on him. You know what I'm saying? If you're in the path of the winter storm that's supposed to be coming, you know what I'm saying, make sure that you're warm, make sure that you got food, make sure that you're welcome. I mean, you're prepared, you know what I'm saying, for the worst. I don't be trusting these weathermen, you know what I'm saying? They get a lot wrong. Have you bracing for something and it don't happen. But at the same time, you know what I'm saying, keep your eyes towards the hill, which cometh your help. All right. Always keep your faith in the Most High. You know what I'm saying? And know that no matter what goes on outside of that, the Most High Yah didn't bring you this far to leave you. Right. So keep that with you. You know what I'm saying? And we'll be back with another Shabbat Bible study. All right. Shabbat Shalom. All right. I wanted to post what y'all was putting on there before we got out of here. All right. All right. Love y'all. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
My eyes on the prize, no lies for the youth. You gotta love them enough to tell them the truth. The reason why they killing and they dying in these streets, they don't know who they is. They don't know who they is. So preachers in pulpit lying through their teeth. I can never hate them, but we do got beef. The reason why they lawless and they hate to hear the truth. They don't know who they is. They don't know who they is. Yahawah, we love you. Yahawah, we love you, we thank, we praise your comely name. This vessel is all yours. Take it over, have your way.